In this episode, you'll learn how to use used to, be used to, get used to, and usually. Now, these expressions are often confused in English. So today, we'll explain the difference, we'll give you some examples in context, and we'll help you with grammar, use, and pronunciation. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello and welcome, especially if you're a new listener to this podcast. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And together with over 50 years of teaching English between us, we're going to help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. How are you doing, Reza?
I'm doing very well. As ever, I'm looking forward to recording this podcast. I think it's a very useful podcast. Well, I think all our podcasts are very useful, if I may say so. But used is a word which gives a lot of problems. So I think it's about time we cleared it up. Don't you think so?
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in to used to and all their different forms this week. But first, we have a voice message from Juan from Colombia, who's living in Australia.
Hello, Risa and Craig. This is Juan. I'm Colombian and currently living in Australia. First of all, I want to say thank you for the hard work that you have done with this podcast. And also, I want to share that I had this belief that learning a language was going to be in 6 months, even in 1 year. But after being in Australia, I realized that it's really long journey and it's no easy process. When I came to Australia, I didn't have any foundation of English. Of course, I'm still learning it. But thanks to you guys, I think I've improved a lot. Actually, your podcast has been really amazing for me. Listening to you guys has been an amazing process for me. Actually, I think my pronunciation is getting better every time that I listen to you guys. And thank you for it. I hope to talk to you guys later and take care. Bye bye.
Well, I agree with you, Juan, that your pronunciation is very, very good. I can't say if you've improved it. I think that might be the first message you've sent us, and I hope it won't be the last. But you have very good pronunciation. Don't you think so, Reza?
Yes, and I'd like to comment on your pronunciation. In fact, I heard ever so slightly that you're getting an Australian accent. You don't sound like an Australian yet, but you will eventually, I'm sure. Your pronunciation of the word better and later, it sounded a bit Australian to me. I heard like better and later, kind of.
And
it was
gonna, he said gonna, yeah.
Getting towards that Australian accent, because Juan, like everybody, is copying what he hears around him. You can't avoid it. It's inevitable, and there's no reason that you should avoid it. So Juan, we're looking forward to more messages from you in the future when you're going to have a lovely Australian accent, we hope.
And you're absolutely right when you say that learning English, getting better at English, it's a journey, it's a process. It's not something that you can do from one day or 1 week to the next. It takes time, patience, and you're doing really, really well. So thanks for your message. It was good to hear from you.
Okay, shall we get cracking? Shall we get started with our main theme today? How to use used to, be used to, get used to, and usually.
I don't know if you remember, Reza, but we have spoken about this topic before, but it was a long time ago. It was January the 31st, 2014, episode 6 of Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig. Do you remember?
I didn't remember the date exactly, but I did remember doing that. Isn't that strange? New Year's Eve, 31st of January.
Well, that was when it was published. I don't know if we recorded it then, probably not. But if you go back and listen to that, we sound very strange, very different on those early episodes. I think we've evolved over the years, and I think we sound a lot more natural now than we did back at the beginning.
Well, I think I sound a bit more natural, but you know what? I still don't like hearing my own voice. I think it's terrible. But hey, if I can convince other people to listen to me, that's great.
And we've decided to revisit this grammar topic for two reasons. First of all, we want to have an episode only about used to, be used to, get used to, etc. When we originally spoke about this, it was mixed in with some vocabulary and other topics. And also, I often hear my students in the conversation course making mistakes with this tricky bit of grammar. Reza, do you notice your students confusing these terms?
All the time. Even at a high level, they sometimes have problems with this. Yeah.
So let's start with the first one, and it's used to, sometimes called the used to past, USED plus 2. When do we use used to, and what is it for, Reza?
So used to always refers to the past, just used to on its own. So we use it to talk about past habits, states, or facts that were true before, but which aren't true now. So it's used above all to contrast or to compare the past with now, above all. Here's an example. Craig used to live in London.
That's
he
true.
Used to live. Yep,
Yeah,
it's true. It's a true example. But he doesn't now, does he? He lives in Valencia. So used to would be a very good expression to use to compare Craig's life now and then. If I said Craig lives in Valencia, but he used to live in London. So used to is really good to highlight changes or contrasts between the past and now.
That's right. So I was born in London, I went to school in London, I worked in London, I lived in London for many years, but now I live here. I used to live in London. However, Reza used to live in Belfast, but he doesn't now. Now he lives in Valencia, the same as me.
Do you know what? We didn't used to podcast when we first met.
So that's the negative. We didn't used to podcast when we first met. We used to go out and drink beer quite a lot, if I remember, in the early days of living here, but we didn't used to podcast. Now, one thing about used to is when you use the negative, you drop the D on use. So USE, they didn't use to podcast. No D on the end of use.
I find that that's a very typical mistake when my students write. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, they forget it, yeah. So used to is with the infinitive, obviously without to, because we have the to after used. So used to go, used to live in London, used to work, used to have. So just use the infinitive of the verb after used to.
Craig, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you used to be a big Mickey Mouse fan?
Mickey Mouse. Well, I was told that I was back in the early days of this podcast, but I haven't been told recently that I'm a Mickey Mouse fan. So maybe I used to be, but now I'm older, so I'm not.
It's just a rumor.
It's been a long time since you mentioned Mickey Mouse. You used to speak about Mickey Mouse a lot.
But not now. I think Craig got a bit tired of hearing about Mickey Mouse because I've made such a big deal of the rumor.
So let's practice a little bit and give you some examples of things that we used to do when we were younger, but we don't do now. Remember that distinction. We're speaking about the past, things that were true in the past, but they are not true now. So Reza, what did you used to do in the past, but you don't do now?
Well, one thing that I used to do is to play cricket. I used to play cricket, but now I never play cricket.
Why did you stop?
Well, I'm just not as sporty as I used to be. And also, here in Spain, virtually nobody plays cricket, so I wouldn't find anybody to play it with. What about you, Craig? is there any sport that you used to play but now you don't?
I used to play football regularly. I really enjoyed playing football, but I stopped probably about 15, 20 years ago when I had back problems, and it was painful for me to play. So, yeah, I used to play regularly, and now I don't.
Well, now that you mention it, that's probably another reason why I stopped playing cricket. I have a problem now with my wrist, W-R-I-S-T. And I used to be a bowler. So in cricket, the bowler is the one who throws the ball. And I used to be what they call a spin bowler. So they're the ones who make the ball spin. But you need your wrist for that. So I used to have a more flexible wrist than I do now. So that's another reason why I don't play cricket.
Another thing I used to do is drink whiskey. I used to really enjoy drinking whiskey from time to time. And now I don't drink alcohol, so I've stopped drinking whiskey. But I used to drink quite a lot of whiskey.
Another thing for me is that I used to play in classical music groups. Particularly when I was a teenager, I was really, really into playing music in groups. And I was in a youth orchestra, and I was in about 5 or 6 different small groups, chamber groups. And it seemed that every year I would probably say that I used to play an average of about 7 or 8 concerts a year.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you miss it?
I do miss it. I do miss it. Remember I mentioned that problem with my wrist? That didn't help me because I played the violin, and you need to have a flexible wrist. And I used to have a flexible wrist, but now I don't. So that makes classical music, playing the violin, a bit harder for me now.
Another thing I used to do is read a lot of fiction books. I used to enjoy reading fiction, and I haven't read fiction books for maybe 15 years. I do read self-help books and productivity books and other books, but fiction, I started listening to podcasts, fiction podcasts, and you recommended a good one to me that I've started listening to. And so I don't read fiction, but I used to.
Believe it or not, Craig, a thing that I used to do is cycle every day. That's right. I used to cycle, get on my bike every day. Hard to believe looking at me now, isn't it?
Here in Valencia or in Belfast?
In Valencia.
I don't remember that.
I would say from the age of I was about 35 at the time, from about 35 to 45 for about 10 years. Yeah, every day I used my bike. I used to cycle to work every day, and I also used to cycle for pleasure. Now I don't even have a bike.
But you used to have one.
I used to have one, yeah.
So notice when we're speaking about the past with used to, we're using the infinitive of the verb used to drink, used to play, used to read, used to cycle. So remember that infinitive, that's important. We'll explain why later. Now you can also use would to talk about things that you did in the past, but the use is a bit different, isn't it, Reza?
Yes, you can use would, but only to talk about past habits, not for past facts or states. Here's an example. When she was young, she used to spend hours reading comics. That's a habit. Yeah, reading comics is a habit. She used to spend hours. Used to spend. If you want, you could say when she was young, she would spend hours reading comics. That's right. Would can be used instead of used to. Now you're probably thinking, hold on, would is a conditional, isn't it? Wood's talking about imagination. Well, that's one use of would, but this is another special use of would. The same as used to talk about habits. However, if you're talking about a past state, then you cannot use would. You can only use used to. Here's an example of that. He used to be fat when I met him many years ago. So to be fat is not a habit. Yeah, it's not something you habitually do, is it? You either are or aren't fat. It's your state, right? In that case, we can't use would because it isn't a habit, it's a state. So you can only use would when you're talking about past habits. Used to can be for habits or states. That's the difference.
So you could say, for example, he would eat a lot of chocolate. He would eat a lot of cakes. He would go to McDonald's every day because that's a habit he repeatedly did.
Yeah. But if it's a state, no. For example, imagine you changed nationality. Imagine that you lived in the United Kingdom and you came to live in Spain and you decided to stop being British and get a Spanish passport and be only Spanish. You could say that I used to be British, but now I'm Spanish. You can't say I would be British. Can't say that because to be British is not a habit. It's a state. You either are or you aren't. So you can't use would for those past states. You can only use would for the past habits.
And another example, if you live, that is a state, it's not a habit. So the example we gave earlier, I used to live in London. I can't say I would live in London. I can say I would go to work every day by car. And I can say Reza used to live in Belfast, but not he would live in Belfast. But I can say he would go to work by bicycle. Now, we did speak about would and used to, specifically the differences. If this isn't clear, if this explanation is not clear and you need more examples and information, go to inglespodcast.com/152 and listen to that episode about the differences between used to and would in the past. Before we continue with this week's podcast, we just want to let you know that you can now improve your English with both of us personally. That's not at the same time, but we both will help you in different ways to improve your English. With me, you can join one of my conversation courses, and that means you'll be in a small group of lovely students, and together we will have discussions and debates and role plays and lots of different activities that are all designed to help you improve your fluency and your confidence when you're speaking English. And for more information, just send me an email, Craig, Craig, at inglespodcast.com. And Reza, you also offer classes online, correct?
That's right. But my focus or speciality is more with one-to-one, with individuals. So if you'd like a one-to-one individual class to focus on your particular needs, you could get in touch with me. Just send me an email to belfastreza@gmail.com.
And now let's get back to the podcast.
Now we're going to talk about be used to. That word be makes a big difference.
To be or not to be?
That is the question. So used to, on its own, is about the past. But if we add that word be, that's different. Be used to refers to the state of being familiar with something or comfortable with something, or a word which will remind you of the Spanish, accustomed to something. Yeah, you would probably say in Spanish, acostumbrado. That's the closest thing to used to. But accustomed in English is very formal. It's far more common to say to be used to.
And as we said before, we have been living here in Spain for many years. We grew up in other countries, but we came here a long time ago, and we've been driving cars here for a long time. As you probably know, in the UK, people drive on the left of the road. However, here in Spain and many other countries, they drive on the right. Now, that's a little difficult at first when you have to change from the left to the right side of the road. But because we've been driving here many, many, many years, we're both used to driving on the right. I'm used to driving on the right. Are you used to driving on the right now, Reza?
I am, yeah. Probably not as much as you because I don't drive so much, but I am used to it now. Yeah.
So we've been driving on the right for more than 25 years. We're used to it. We are used to it. That's an example of be used to. Now, you can obviously change the verb to be depending on the verb tense and the subject. And to make the negative the same as in the present continuous, just use not for the negative. Can you think of some examples, Reza?
Here's an example where it's to be used to, but I'm putting to be in the past. She was used to working at weekends. So imagine her boss said to her, "Do you mind working at weekends?" And she said, "No, no problems. I've been working weekends all my life." She was used to working at weekends. It wasn't a problem for her. She was already accustomed to it. She was used to working at weekends. So the verb to be doesn't have to be in the present. If you're talking about being accustomed to something in the past, it could be in the past.
A bit like us, really. We were talking about that before we started recording. We're used to working weekends. You're used to working on Saturdays, and we've always been used to working here and teaching at weekends.
Yeah, it's nothing new for us.
What about eating late? I can say that when I first came to Spain, obviously in the UK, we eat earlier. We probably have dinner around 6 o'clock, 7, maybe even 5, 5:30 in the afternoon. But here in Spain, people tend to eat much later. When I first arrived in Spain, I wasn't used to eating so late. Now notice the gerund, the ing on the verb there. When we're talking about something we're accustomed to or not accustomed to, we're using the ing form of the verb. I wasn't used to eating so late when I first came here.
And now, 25 years later or 30 years later, what would you say?
Well, I was used to eating late until maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And then I found it quite difficult to get to sleep when I had like a lot of food about 8 or 9 in the evening. So now I'm eating earlier. Maybe that's my age. So now I'm used to eating a bit earlier.
So you've gone full circle.
I'm getting there. I'm not eating at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. like in the UK, but I'm used to eating a bit earlier than 3 or 4 years ago.
So when you arrived here at first, you weren't used to eating late. Then later, you were used to eating late. But now that you're a bit older, you've gone back to eating earlier again.
It's strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about you?
I am used to eating late. Yeah.
What time do you usually eat?
I would say about 9 or 9:30.
That's late.
Is when I normally eat. Of course, when I first arrived here, I wasn't used to it because when I was in Belfast, I used to eat about 6 o'clock. So I wasn't used to eating late, but now I can say I am used to eating late.
And notice that Reza used the object it with used to. It must have an object. So used to what? Used to eating late, used to cycling to work, or just used to it. So he wasn't used to it, which means he wasn't used to eating late.
Yeah, as Craig said, don't forget, if you're going to use a verb, it has to be the ing form. So you can use a verb instead of a noun. Yeah, you could say, I'm used to Spanish food. Or you could say, I'm used to eating late. So when you use a verb as if it were a noun, in English, you always use the ing form. So don't confuse it with used to for the past. Remember, that was with infinitive. For example, I used to be much slimmer. Now I'm fatter. I used to be. I'm talking about in the past. But if you're talking about being accustomed to something, it's to be used to, and the verb is in the ing form, not the infinitive form. I think one thing I can say on behalf of both of us, for me and for Craig, we are used to recording podcasts together. Would you agree?
Yes, I think if we're not used to it by now, I don't think we'll ever get used to it.
But of course, we weren't used to it at the very beginning. The first 5 or 6 podcasts we did were really difficult because we weren't used to it. We had never done it before. But now, after, let me see, how many is it? 489, I can say that we are used to recording podcasts together.
Now, there's another expression. We've had used to in the past. We've had be used to. Now let's look at get used to. When we recorded back in 2014, when we were getting used to recording podcasts, Reza used the example that he had his first smartphone, his first smart mobile phone. And he said he's getting used to it. So my question is, Reza, are you used to it yet? Are you used to using it?
Now, yes, I am used to it. I am used to it. I got used to it. I changed. So in 2014, it was new to me. So that year was when I was getting used to it. But now, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, 9 or 10 years later, you might not listen to this podcast until the year after we record it. I don't know. So 9 or 10 years later, or 11 or 12 years later, I am used to it.
So when we use get with used to, we're focusing on the process of becoming familiar with or comfortable with or accustomed to something. Getting used to a new device, for example, a new software program. So we're slowly becoming accustomed to it. Reza, did it take you a long time to get used to driving on the right in Spain?
Not really, no. I managed to get used to it quickly. I adapted easily. What about you?
Yeah, it took me maybe 2 weeks, I think, to get used to it. And then, I felt quite comfortable driving on the right. Remember, when you're using get, you can change the verb to get and use it in different tenses. For example, the past of get is got. I got used to it. I'm getting used to it. Present continuous. Or future, I will get used to it eventually. Reza, can you think of another example?
What about this? I moved in with my partner last month. We're getting used to living together. This means my partner and I are learning how to live together. It's a new thing for us. So remember, get used to is all about the process of becoming accustomed. To be used to be, that means it's already happened. Yeah. But to get used to is about the process of you adapting. That's the difference.
So it's not always easy to get used to living with someone. You have to share cupboard space, wardrobe space. You have to get used to people's different habits. It's not easy getting used to living with a person if you're used to living alone.
Craig, is there anything about Spain that you think you will never get used to? Is there anything about Spain that you think... Craig, is there anything about Spain that you think you will never get used to? Even in the future, you're not going to be able to adapt.
Yes. As long as I'm living in this flat, I'll never get used to the noise the neighbors make when we're trying to record. Now, I've deliberately left the banging noise in, but usually I edit out the noise that the neighbors make, and Reza and I have to repeat what we've said if the neighbors are moving furniture or making noise next door. But I've deliberately left that in so that you can hear it. And oh my God, I will never get used to trying to record a podcast with the neighbors making noise. What about you? Is there something that you wouldn't get used to ever?
There's one thing I don't want to get used to, but I'm afraid I may have got used to it against my wishes. And that is having really loud conversations, maybe with people shouting. I find that here in the Mediterranean, people can get very excited and raise their voices a lot.
Yeah.
And for me, too much sometimes. And I think I may have started doing it myself because sometimes I'm in the UK or Ireland having a conversation and I think, why am I talking much more loudly than everyone else? It's like, I may have got used to the Valencian way, but I don't want to. I don't want to be that person who talks really loud. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. That's not an easy thing to get used to. Again, let me mention, because this is a mistake that many learners of English make, be careful how you use be used to and get used to and used to, because be used to and get used to are similar phrases about being or getting accustomed to something. However, used to is separate because it's focusing on the past. So used to plus infinitive without to, and be used to and get used to with the ing form of the verb, the gerund.
Now, there's one more thing we want to talk about, which is quite different, but it seems to cause confusion. And that is the adverb of frequency, usually. People often seem to confuse usually and use and to be used to, but they're really quite different. So usually, as I said, is an adverb of frequency. So it's similar to words like never, always, sometimes, and often, adverbs which describe frequency. We usually, although not always, place adverbs of frequency just before the main verb.
Yeah. So try and remember that. Here's an example. I usually have fruit for breakfast. So have is the verb, usually goes before the verb. But sometimes I hear mistakes. I hear people say, I used to have fruit for breakfast. And that can be really confusing because, wait, are you speaking about the past? Are you speaking about a current habit? Are you speaking about a past habit? So be careful if you're using usually or used to there.
I'll give you an example with a different adverb of frequency to compare it to usually. I never take the last chocolate biscuit. Craig usually takes the last chocolate biscuit.
Who told you that? That's not true. I usually eat the whole packet.
Craig doesn't usually eat more than 1 or 2 biscuits a day, I'd say. You eat the whole packet, you think, in one session or
Well,
slowly?
I used to. Now I'm trying to lose weight, so I
Yeah.
don't. But yeah, I used to eat 1 or 2 biscuits and then eat the whole packet. I wasn't able to stop. It's terrible, isn't it?
Now you don't usually eat more than 1 or 2, do you? Now,
No.
you used to eat more, but now you don't usually eat more than 1 or 2.
No, I usually have 1 or 2.
Craig has often made mistakes when speaking Spanish.
And I still do.
Yeah, and me too. So there's the word often. So far we've had usually, never, often. So can you see that usually is an adverb of frequency? It is not the same as used to or to be used to or to get used to. It's not the same. Listeners, I got a question for you. Do you usually listen to us on Spotify or another platform? We'd be interested to know. Why not get in touch and tell us how you normally listen to us? Is it Spotify? Is it through some other platform? Please let us know.
Reza, did you used to believe anything that you don't believe now?
That's a good question. Yes. The simple answer is everything about God. But now I believe some things about God, but not all things. I'm more skeptical than I used to be.
So you used to believe in God?
Oh, yeah, completely. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But now I would call myself agnostic, I think is the word. That I think there may be some truth in it, but definitely not all of it is true. So I'm less religious than I used to be. Craig, are you used to waking up before 6 o'clock?
No, absolutely not. I've never been able to get used to waking up early, and especially at 6 a.m. Maybe I'll wake up at 7. I usually wake up about 7, 7:30, but I'm not used to waking up earlier than that.
Craig, tell us about something you want to get used to. So you're not used to it at the moment, but you want to get used to it.
I would like to get used to making videos on a regular basis. Occasionally I make videos to teach English, but that's something I'd like to get used to doing regularly, let's say 3 or 4 times a week, and publishing similar to the podcast on a regular basis. So I'm not used to doing it yet, but I'm hoping to get used to doing it in the future.
We've already spoken about a couple of things that we've had to get used to. We're about moving to Spain from the UK. But Craig, if you had to choose the most difficult of all, what was the most difficult thing to get used to when you moved here?
Moving to here, to Spain.
Yeah.
Well, obviously the language, I think that may go without saying, but it was really difficult for me to get used to kissing girls on the cheek as a greeting. Because in the UK, we don't do that. We'll just say hi. Maybe we'll shake hands in a formal situation, but we wouldn't kiss a girl or a woman we didn't know the first time we met them. And here, it was very common. But it took me about a year of living here to get used to it completely.
Do you think there's a possibility that Spanish people will have to get used to not kissing when they meet them? Because it's in the news these days a lot about, should you kiss when you meet a woman, a man and a woman? There's been a lot of debate about it recently. What do you think?
I mean, it stopped during the pandemic. People didn't kiss as a greeting during the pandemic. And many girls told me that they're really happy because they didn't feel comfortable kissing strange men on the cheek if they didn't know them, that close proximity to somebody they didn't know. So maybe it'll change. Who knows? What was the most difficult thing for you, apart from language, to get used to?
Yeah, so language is definitely number one. I guess at the beginning, that typical Spanish timetable. But now, as I said earlier, I am used to it.
Your timetable at school or eating?
No, just the cultural timetable, which includes eating, yeah. So the time that people do things, opening hours of shops, that type of thing. In small towns, shops tend to close in the middle of the day.
Here as well?
Yeah, here as well. Yeah, the small ones close. That's true. So 2:00 in the afternoon seems like a very good time to go shopping in the UK and not in Spain.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get used to that, for sure. You go to the centre to do things in the morning and 2:00, the time's finished until 4:30, 5. What do? You have lunch for 3 hours or do you go back to your house and come out again in the afternoon? It's crazy. It took me a long time to get used to that.
Craig, imagine you had to give advice to someone who's going to the UK. What do you think would be the most difficult thing for that person to get used to in the UK?
Well, that could depend. I think there are various things. They could have difficulty getting used to the weather, regional accents, depending on where they were living in the UK. They might have problems getting used to the food, meal times, as I think you mentioned, and of course driving on the left. And they'd probably find it difficult to get used to the racism in the UK. Quite a lot of racism where I used to live.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Although for me, number one would probably be, if you're coming from Spain, the weather. You'd be surprised how much it can rain in a week, every week.
So our advice is get used to carrying an umbrella wherever you go. Reza, why do you think some people find it so difficult to get used to new technology?
Well, I'm a very good person to ask about that because I am one of those people. I do eventually get used to new technology, but I do find it difficult at first. It's just because I think I'm one of these people who doesn't like doing things wrong. I like the idea of getting things right. But with new technology, it's very easy to get it wrong. And so that's why I'm a bit nervous around new technology. But I know it's irrational. I shouldn't be nervous because what's the worst thing that can happen if you press the wrong key on a computer? There's not many serious things that can happen, but it does make me a bit nervous. And I think that's what happens with people, the idea that they're going to get it wrong and they don't like that. What do you think?
I agree. That's a good point. And I also think people don't like change. They don't like getting used to new things. And when you're using technology, it changes so fast. And the fact that you have to learn new software and learn new things, it's the change that people find it hard to get used to, I think. But now it's your turn to practice your English. Can you tell us 3 things that you used to do when you were younger that you don't do now? What about something that took you a long time to get used to? Practice the grammar and send us a voice message. You can do that by going to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/English podcast. And remember, you only have 90 seconds to tell us your examples.
If you'd prefer to write, you could send an email either to craig@englishpodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
And this podcast is sponsored in part by mansioningles.com. Visit the online store. Go to store.mansioningles.net, and there you'll see some courses, paid courses that you can buy to help you with your English.
As always, we'd like to say thank you to our Patreon supporters. Patreon, that's Patreon. And what those sponsors do on the Patreon program is donate some money. It can be as little as $1.50 per month. And as a way of saying thank you, we give those people instant access to audio transcriptions so they can see all of the words of the podcasts. If you're interested, have a look at the link in the show notes. It's patreon.com/English podcast.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to thank each of you individually for your support, but we do thank you, and we want to say a special hello and thank you and welcome to our latest Patreon supporters. And they are Esteban Sanchez, Maria Jose Cuenca Bonilla, Carcopu, and Pablo Albert. Thank you to you and to everybody who's supporting us on the Patreon program.
Craig, what's in next week's episode?
Well, you might be thinking of a trip, going away, going abroad, traveling somewhere, having a rest. So we're going to talk about how you plan a holiday, a vacation. We'll look at some vocabulary and give you some advice before you go on a trip. Join us for that next week. Have a wonderful week, and until next time, it's goodbye from Reza.
And it's bye-bye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.